The red marker on the map expanded, and the holographic display filled with images, a refueling station orbiting a pale green gas giant, a cargo ship with a scratched hull and mismatched engine pods, and the face of a woman. She had short dark hair, a strong jaw, and the kind of steady eyes that looked like they had seen bad weather and learned not to flinch. Her name was Laura Bennett said. 11 years ago, she was a civilian cargo captain running humanitarian supply routes through the Varese corridor. She carried food, medicine, water purification equipment, basic supplies for colony worlds that could not sustain themselves yet. She was not military. She had served in the human navy years earlier. But at the time of this incident, she was a private citizen operating a licensed freight vessel with a crew of 3. Tyvek waved a hand impatiently. And someone wanted her dead. The Varese crime syndicate. They were relatively new at the time. They had built their operation on smuggling through the same corridor Laura Bennett used for her supply runs. Her routes were legal, protected by trade agreements, and they were cutting into the syndicate's profits. Their leader, a Varese crime lord named Drezik, decided the simplest solution was to remove her. Helm pulled up 6 profile images. 6 faces, none of them human. All of them were professionals, contract killers hired from different worlds, each with a long record of successful assassinations. Drezik hired the best he could afford. 6 operatives, all experienced, all well-armed. They tracked Laura Bennett to a refueling station called Outpost Callan, orbiting the gas giant Vareth 4. They waited until she was alone, separated from her crew, walking through a maintenance corridor on the lower levels of the station. They cornered her in a dead-end section with no exits and no security cameras. Helm paused. He looked at Tyvek as if weighing whether the console was ready to hear what came next. 6 professional killers, Helm said. Armed, prepared. They had studied her movements for a week. They had every advantage. And, Tyvek said, she killed 3 of them in the first 90 seconds. The chamber went very quiet. Helm brought up the incident report, compiled after the fact from station security logs, forensic evidence, and the testimony of the 3 surviving operatives who were later captured. He walked through it slowly, because the details mattered. Laura Bennett had been unarmed when the 6 operatives blocked both ends of the corridor and moved in. She had no weapon, no armor, and no warning. What she had was a body that had evolved on one of the most dangerous planets in the galaxy. A world where the gravity was strong enough to build dense muscle and heavy bones, where the atmosphere bred endurance, and where every living thing had spent millions of years learning to fight, run, and survive. The first operative reached her and swung a blade designed to cut through light body armor. Laura caught his arm, twisted it at the joint, and broke it. The snap was audible on the security recording from the adjacent corridor. Before the operative could scream, she drove her elbow into his throat and dropped him. The second operative lunged from behind. Laura spun, grabbed him by the face with one hand, and drove her thumb into his eye. He went down howling, clutching his ruined socket. She ripped a fire suppression canister off the wall, a heavy metal cylinder meant to be mounted, not carried, and swung it into the side of his head with enough force to dent the casing. He hit the floor and did not get up. The remaining 3 operatives hesitated. That hesitation saved their lives in the short term, because Laura used the 2 seconds of confusion to kick open a ventilation grate and disappear into the station's maintenance network. She was gone before they could react. Helm let the silence hang for a moment before he continued. The 3 surviving operatives spent the next 2 days searching the station for her, he said. They had thermal scanners, motion detectors, and communication equipment. Laura Bennett had nothing except the fire suppression canister and whatever she could find in the maintenance tunnels. She found enough, Helm said. Over the next 48 hours, Laura Bennett did not try to escape the station. She did not call for help. She did not hide. Instead, she hunted the 3 remaining operatives through the dark, narrow tunnels and service corridors of Outpost Callan. She used her knowledge of the station's layout. She had docked there dozens of times on her supply runs, to move through spaces the operatives did not even know existed. She disabled the first one by rigging a coolant pipe to burst when a nearby door was opened. The operative was blinded by the chemical spray, and Laura dragged him into a storage room where she tied him to a support beam with electrical cable. She caught the second one, alone, in a cargo bay. The details of that encounter were unclear because the station's internal sensors in that section had been manually shut off. When security teams later found the operative, he was unconscious, with 4 broken ribs and a dislocated shoulder. He refused to talk about what had happened. The third operative, the team leader, barricaded himself in a docking bay and tried to call for extraction. Laura cut the communication lines to that section of the station. He was found 12 hours later, sitting in the corner of the bay, with his weapons laid on the floor in front of him, his hands raised. He surrendered to station security without resistance. When asked why he had given up, he said, "She was in the walls. I could hear her breathing. She was waiting for me to sleep." Tyvek had not moved during the entire account. His gray fingers were pressed flat against the surface of his desk. "That is," he started, and then stopped. "That is an impressive survival story. But she was former military. She had training." "She had basic naval training from 8 years prior," Pound said. "She was a supply officer. She drove a cargo ship. She was not special forces. She was not a commando. She was a freight captain who delivered medicine to colonies." He let that settle. "But that is not why I am telling you this story. The fight on Outpost Callan was remarkable, but it is not the part that matters." Peln brought up 2 new faces, a man with a scruffy beard and tired eyes, Sam Griffin, Laura's co-pilot, and a woman with red hair pulled back in a messy knot, Katie Owen, her engineer. When Sam and Katie learned what had happened, Peln said, they did not report it to the authorities. They did not file a complaint with the Trade Commission. They did not hire lawyers. "What did they do?" Tyvek asked. "They took it personally." Peln described the next 3 months in careful detail. Sam Griffin, a man whose only notable skills were flying cargo ships and playing card games, somehow obtained a forged identity good enough to pass Varesi security screening. He infiltrated Drezik's inner circle by posing as a freelance smuggler looking for work. Over the course of 10 weeks, he mapped Drezik's entire operation from the inside. His supply chains, his financial accounts, his safe houses, and his escape routes. Meanwhile, Katie Owen, an engineer who had spent most of her career repairing old ship engines and complaining about outdated wiring, quietly gained access to the maintenance systems of Drezik's personal flagship during a routine docking at a neutral port. She spent 4 hours in the ship's navigation computer core. No one noticed her. No one checked the logs. 3 weeks later, when a rival gang declared war on Drezik's operation and things began to fall apart, Drezik did exactly what Sam and Katie knew he would do. He boarded his flagship, entered emergency coordinates, and his navigation computer executed the jump flawlessly. It jumped him directly into the gravity well of a neutron star. His ship was crushed to the size of a coin in less than 1 second. The Varesi syndicate collapsed within a month. Not because of any police operation, not because of any military strike, because 2 ordinary humans on a cargo ship decided that what happened to their captain could not go unanswered. Peln turned off the display showing the incident files and looked at Tyvek. 3 humans, he said. A freight captain, a co-pilot, and an engineer. Not soldiers, not spies, not warriors. Just 3 people who worked together on a small ship and carried medicine to colonies. He stepped closer to Tyvek's desk. And they destroyed an entire criminal empire because someone hurt one of their own. His mouth was slightly open, and his dark eyes had a glassy, distant look, like a man who had just realized the ground beneath his feet was not as solid as he had always believed. "Consul," Pound said gently, "this is not the worst story. This is the one I am starting with because it is the tamest. Would you like me to continue?" Tyvek swallowed hard. He nodded once. Peln reached for the next red marker on the galactic map. Peln did not reach for just one marker. He reached for all of them. The galactic map lit up with dozens of red points, scattered across systems and sectors like embers from a fire that had been burning for decades. Each one was an incident. Each one was a lesson that someone in the galaxy had learned the hard way. And each one ended the same way. Not with humankind launching a war, not with fleets darkening the sky above some alien homeworld, but with something quieter, slower, and far more terrifying. "What I showed you with Laura Bennett and her crew," Pell said, "was not an exception. It was not a fluke. It was a pattern, and every intelligence service in the galaxy has a name for it." He brought up a document, a joint classified briefing, prepared by the intelligence agencies of 9 different species, all of whom had independently reached the same conclusion. They call it the doctrine of disproportionate response. "Disproportionate?" Helm said. "It means that when a human is targeted, their response will always exceed the original act by a factor that no predictive model in the galaxy has been able to accurately calculate." Helm said, "You push a human, and they do not push back. They pull the floor out from under you. They burn the building down. They dismantle everything you have ever built. And they do it with a kind of calm, methodical patience that makes it worse. Because you realize they are not acting out of rage. They are acting out of principle." Helm began cycling through the red markers, pulling up one case after another. He did not linger on the details the way he had with the Varesi incident. He moved quickly, because the point was not any single story. It was the weight of all of them together. The first marker he opened was a system called Pelos, a neutral trade world where species from across the galaxy met to negotiate commercial agreements. 7 years ago, a Kelosi political faction that controlled a large share of the rare mineral trade had grown concerned about a human ambassador named Nate Bishop. He was young for a diplomat, only 34, and he had a reputation for being patient, thorough, and almost impossible to lie to. He had spent 6 months quietly documenting irregularities in the Kelosi faction's trade filings, and they knew he was getting close to something that could ruin them. So they hired a sniper. The shot was taken from a rooftop overlooking the main trade plaza during a public ceremony. It grazed Nate's left shoulder. He stumbled, bled onto his suit jacket, and was rushed to a medical facility. He survived, easily. The wound was not serious. The Kelosi faction celebrated. They assumed the message had been sent. They expected Nate Bishop to withdraw from the investigation, request a transfer, or at the very least, slow down. He did none of those things. Within 1 galactic standard year, the entire Kelosi faction had been dismantled, but not by soldiers and not by warships. Instead, a team of human intelligence analysts, forensic accountants, legal experts, and diplomatic liaisons descended on the Kelosi trade records like a wave of quiet, polite, unstoppable bureaucracy. They traced every bribe. They mapped every illegal weapons shipment. They found every hidden bank account on every shadow world the Kelosi had used to launder their profits. They compiled a legal case so thorough and so airtight that the Galactic Trade Court did not even need to deliberate. The verdict took 11 minutes. The faction's leaders were sentenced to 40 years on a penal colony. Their assets were seized. Their political allies disavowed them publicly. And through all of it, not a single human fired a single shot. Nate Bishop returned to his post 3 weeks after the assassination attempt, with a small bandage on his shoulder and the same calm, patient expression he always wore. When a reporter asked him if he was afraid of further retaliation, he smiled and said, "I have a good team." Peln moved to the next marker. This one was on an ocean world called Tessara, a planet covered almost entirely in water, with a few scattered island chains and floating research platforms anchored to the shallow continental shelves. A human marine biologist named Meg Turner had been stationed there for 2 years, studying the aquatic ecosystems as part of an interspecies environmental research program. She was quiet, dedicated, and spent most of her days underwater in a diving suit, cataloging species of deep-sea organisms that no one else in the galaxy cared about. A Jarathi warlord named Kellis had claimed territorial rights over Tessara's ocean floor, where vast deposits of a rare energy crystal had been discovered. The human research presence complicated his claim. Galactic law gave research teams certain protections that made it difficult to simply force them off the planet. Kellis decided to solve the problem by removing Meg Turner permanently. He had one of his agents introduce a slow-acting neurotoxin into the water supply of Meg's research platform. The toxin was designed to mimic a natural bacterial infection. It was supposed to kill her within 3 days, and the death would be recorded as an unfortunate but unremarkable illness. It did not work. Meg Turner got sick. She ran a fever. She vomited for 2 days, and then, on the 3rd day, she got up, drank a glass of water, and went back to work. Peln paused here to explain something that Tyvek clearly did not understand. Humans evolved on a planet called Earth, he said. It is a world of extraordinary biological hostility. Their environment is filled with bacteria, viruses, parasites, fungi, and toxins that have been locked in an evolutionary arms race with the human immune system for millions of years. The result is that humans possess one of the most aggressive and adaptable immune systems of any known species. The toxin that Kellis used was designed to kill a Jarathi in hours. Meg Turner's body identified it as a threat, attacked it, broke it down, and flushed it out of her system in 72 hours. Kellis, when he learned that the poisoning had failed, panicked. He knew the humans would investigate. He knew they would find the toxin, and he knew what would happen next. He gathered his personal wealth, boarded his fastest ship, and ran. It did not matter. A human naval vessel called the Steadfast Horizon was assigned to track him. It followed him across 4 star systems over the course of 8 months. Not quickly, not aggressively, just steadily, patiently, always one step behind, always closing the distance. Kellis changed his ship's identification codes. The Steadfast Horizon found him. He hid in an asteroid belt. They waited him out. He jumped to an uncharted system with no relay beacons and no traffic. 3 weeks later, the Steadfast Horizon dropped out of faster-than-light travel, less than 1,000 kilometers from his position. Kellis surrendered. He was brought before a galactic tribunal and charged with attempted murder of a protected research personnel. The human captain who arrested him, a man named Pete Marsh, reportedly stood in the docking bay as Kellis was led away in restraints and said 6 words to him. "You could have just left her alone." Peln closed the file and looked at Tyvek. "Do you see the pattern?" he asked. Tyvek was gripping the edge of his desk. His gray skin had gone a shade lighter. "They do not stop," he said quietly. "No," Peln agreed, "they do not stop. And that is the key to understanding everything about humans and why your contract will never be filled." Peln brought up a graph, a simple curve plotted on 2 axes. The horizontal axis represented the severity of the original act against a human, ranging from minor insult on the left to lethal attack on the right. The vertical axis represented the intensity of the human response. The curve was not linear. It was not even steep. It was exponential. Every intelligence agency in the galaxy maintains a version of this graph, Peln said. They call it the human retaliation curve. On the low end, insults, minor offenses, trade disputes, Humans are remarkably tolerant. They negotiate, they compromise, they let things go. Most species interact with humans at this end of the curve and come away thinking they are soft, passive, even weak. He pointed to the middle of the curve, where it began to bend sharply upward. But as the severity of the offense increases, something changes. It is not gradual. It is like a switch. Once a human perceives that an act has crossed a line, particularly an act of violence against someone they consider innocent, the response becomes total. Not proportionate, not measured, total. He pointed to the far right of the curve, where the line went nearly vertical. An assassination attempt against a civilian sits here, he said, at the top of the curve. In the zone where humans stop calculating costs and benefits and start operating on something older, something deeper than strategy. What? Tyvek whispered. Peln looked at him with those wide, dark, Nuri eyes. Principle, he said. Humans will spend years, burn fortunes, and risk their own lives, not because it is practical, but because they believe, in some fundamental part of their being, that what was done was wrong and must be answered. Not can be answered, must be. They treat it as a debt, and they do not believe in unpaid debts. Tyvek sat in silence for a long time. Then he asked, very quietly, "Does this only apply to their soldiers, their military?" Peln shook his head slowly. "The most dangerous responses," he said, "have always come from the ordinary ones." He reached for the next marker on the map, the largest one, pulsing a deep and steady red. "Let me tell you about Raneth Prime." Raneth Prime was not the kind of planet that showed up in travel guides or diplomatic dispatches. It was a small, rocky world on the frontier of explored space, with thin forests, shallow rivers, and soil that was just barely good enough to grow crops if you worked hard and did not expect too much. It had no strategic value. It had no major trade routes passing through its system. What it did have was a deposit of rare minerals buried deep beneath its northern continent, and that was enough to get people killed. 5 years before Tyvek posted his contract, a small human colony had been established on Raneth Prime. 212 people. Families mostly, young couples looking for cheap land, retired workers wanting a quiet life, a handful of scientists studying the local ecology. They had built their settlement in a wide valley near a river, with prefabricated housing units, a communal greenhouse, a school, and a small medical clinic. The colony was led, in the loosest sense of the word, by a man named Ben Hartley. Ben was a schoolteacher. He had taught history and literature to teenagers on Earth for 15 years before deciding he wanted something different. He was 46 years old, soft-spoken, and had never held a weapon in his life. He organized town meetings, helped settle disputes between neighbors, and spent his evenings reading old books on a tablet while his dog slept at his feet. He was, by every conventional measure, the least threatening person on the planet. 3 alien species, the Dothari, the Erleki, and the Fenoshi, had formed a quiet consortium to claim Raneth Prime's mineral deposits. Under galactic law, an established settlement gave humans legal claim to the land. And the consortium could not simply file a counterclaim without years of legal proceedings that would attract attention they did not want. So they chose a faster solution. They hired a mercenary company called the Iron Veil. The Iron Veil was not a small operation. They were a professional military force. Over 300 trained soldiers equipped with military-grade weapons, armored transports, and orbital drop capability. They had fought in corporate wars, border conflicts, and suppression campaigns across a dozen systems. Their commander, a Dothari officer named Vren, had a reputation for clean, efficient work. The plan was simple. Assault the colony at night, eliminate the settlers, destroy the evidence, and make it look like a reactor meltdown caused by faulty colonial equipment. The minerals would be available for extraction within a month, and no one would ever know the truth. The Iron Veil landed on Raneth Prime under cover of darkness, touching down in a dry basin 12 kilometers south of the colony. They advanced on foot through the thin forest, moving in 3 columns, expecting to reach the settlement within 2 hours and finish the operation before dawn. They did not know that Ben Hartley had been worried for months. He had noticed the survey drones, small, quiet machines that appeared in the sky above the colony, always at the edge of visual range, always moving in patterns that did not match any scientific or commercial survey protocol he could find in the public databases. He had mentioned it to a few of the other colonists, and together they had done some digging. They could not prove anything, but the pattern made Ben uneasy, and Ben Hartley was the kind of man who trusted his unease. So he prepared. He did not have weapons. He did not have soldiers. What he had was 212 people who had chosen to build a life on a hard world. And every single one of them had the kind of practical, stubborn resourcefulness that comes from living on the frontier. He had agricultural drones that could be reprogrammed to carry payloads. He had mining explosives stored in a locked shed near the greenhouse. He had a communication array that he had personally modified to reach the nearest human relay station, 4 light-years away. And he had the one thing that the Iron Veil did not expect from a colony of farmers and schoolteachers: the absolute refusal to lie down and die. The Iron Veil's first column entered the valley at 2 in the morning. They made it 400 meters before the ground exploded beneath them. Ben had buried mining charges along every natural approach to the settlement, linked to motion sensors salvaged from the agricultural monitoring system. The first blast killed 9 mercenaries instantly and scattered the column into the trees. Before they could regroup, a swarm of agricultural drones descended on them from above. Small machines originally designed to spray pesticide on crops, now loaded with industrial solvent that burned through light armor on contact. The second column tried to flank from the east, moving along the riverbed. They ran into a wall of improvised obstacles, fallen trees, tangled wire from the greenhouse supports, and trenches dug by the colony's construction equipment. The colonists were waiting on the far side, armed with mining tools, cutting lasers meant for rock excavation, and the kind of desperate courage that turns ordinary people into something that professional soldiers are not trained to face. The third column reached the settlement itself. They breached the outer perimeter and moved between the housing units, expecting to find civilians cowering in their homes. Instead, they found empty buildings, dark corridors, and tripwires connected to pressurized gas canisters that filled enclosed spaces with choking, blinding fumes. The colonists were not inside their homes. They were on the rooftops, in the crawl spaces, and behind every piece of cover the settlement offered, and they fought with a ferocity that the Iron Veil's communications officer later described in a panicked transmission to their orbiting ship as something I have never seen in 30 years of combat. The battle lasted 9 hours. When it was over, 41 colonists were dead. 12 of them were children. The colony's medical clinic had been destroyed. The school was burned to its foundation. 3 of the housing units were nothing but rubble. But the Iron Veil was gone. Not retreated, not withdrawn. Gone. Every single one of their 314 operatives was either dead or captured. Their armored transports were wrecked. Their communication equipment was destroyed. Their commander, Vren, was found alive in the forest 2 kilometers from the settlement, sitting against a tree with both legs broken, staring at nothing. When the colonists found him, he did not resist. He did not speak. He simply looked up at the humans standing over him with an expression that witnesses later described as complete and absolute disbelief. The news reached human space within a day, and something changed. It was not loud. There were no angry speeches, no demands for war, no fleets scrambling to launch. What happened was quieter, and in the judgment of every galactic intelligence agency that studied the aftermath, far more dangerous. A woman named Clara Dixon received a message at her home on Earth. Her nephew, a 9-year-old boy named Jack, had been one of the 12 children killed in the attack. Clara was not military. She was not law enforcement. She was an independent data analyst who had spent 20 years working in financial compliance. The kind of person who spent her days tracing money through shell corporations and numbered accounts. She was very good at her job, and she had never had a personal reason to use her skills for anything other than paying clients. Now she did. Clara did not go to the authorities. She did not make public statements. She did not call for revenge. She sat down at her workstation, opened her analytical tools, and began to trace the money behind the iron veil. She worked backwards from the mercenary company's financial records that had been seized by human intelligence during the aftermath of the battle. And she followed every credit, every transfer, every payment through layer after layer of shell accounts, proxy firms, and encrypted financial networks. It took her 2 years. She did not stop. She did not take breaks. She did not lose focus. And at the end of those 2 years, she had a complete map of the entire conspiracy. Every member of the Dofari Erleki Fenoshi Consortium, every financier who had contributed funds, every politician who had signed off on the operation, and every intermediary who had helped arrange the contract with the Iron Veil. She handed the file to the United Earth Coalition's diplomatic corps. It was 4,000 pages long. What followed was not war. It was worse. The consortium's financial networks were exposed to galactic regulatory bodies. Their trade licenses were revoked. Their assets were frozen. Their allies, terrified of being associated with a group that had targeted human civilians, abandoned them overnight. The Dothari co-conspirator was tried in galactic court and found guilty of crimes against sentient life. The Erleki financier lost everything he had ever owned. The Fennoshi politician who had authorized the operation was removed from office by his own government, which issued a formal public apology to the human coalition. The colony on Ranith Prime was rebuilt. It took 3 years. New families came. A memorial was raised in the center of the settlement, a simple stone wall with 41 names carved into it, 12 of them followed by small stars to mark the children. Ben Hartley, the school teacher who had organized the defense, went back to teaching. He never spoke publicly about the battle. When journalists tried to interview him, he declined politely and said he had nothing interesting to say. The only comment he ever made on record was to a neighbor, overheard at a community gathering. When someone asked him how he had known what to do that night, he said, "I did not know what to do. I just knew we were not leaving." Peln turned off the display. The briefing chamber was dark and silent, except for the low hum of the station's life support systems. "That is the story of Ranith Prime," he said. A school teacher and 200 farmers defeated a professional army, and then a data analyst with a personal grudge dismantled a 3-species conspiracy that had operated in secret for years. He looked at Tyvek. "This is what humans do, not always with guns, not always with ships, sometimes with patience, sometimes with spreadsheets, but always, always with the absolute certainty that what was done to them will be answered." The briefing chamber felt smaller than it had before. The walls seemed closer, the ceiling lower, the air thicker. Tyvek sat behind his polished desk and stared at the holographic display, which had returned to its original image, the face of Danny Cole, the human diplomat. Brown hair, calm expression, the kind of face you would forget 5 minutes after seeing it. Tyvek had looked at that face 100 times in the past week. He had looked at it with contempt, with frustration, with the easy confidence of a man who believed that any problem could be solved with enough money and the right amount of violence. Now he looked at it with something he had not felt in decades, He looked at it with doubt. "Tell me about him," Tyvek said. His voice was quieter than before, stripped of its usual authority. "Tell me about the target." Helm pulled up the file on Danny Cole. It was not a thick file. There was not much to tell, and that, Pell knew, was precisely what made it dangerous. Danny Cole was 42 years old. He had grown up in a small town in a region of Earth called the Midwest. His father had been a mechanic, and his mother had been a nurse. He had gone to a public university, studied history and political science, and spent 11 years teaching high school before the first contact with alien civilizations changed the course of human history. When the United Earth Coalition began building its diplomatic corps, Danny had applied. He passed every assessment, not because he was brilliant or charismatic, but because he had the one quality that the selection board valued above all others. He listened. He listened to everyone. He remembered what they said. He treated every species, every culture, and every representative with the same steady, unhurried respect, and over time, people who had come to the negotiating table with suspicion and hostility found themselves trusting him without quite understanding why. He had been married to a woman named Lori for 14 years. They had 2 sons, aged 9 and 6. He had no military training. He had no combat record. He did not carry a weapon. The most dangerous thing he owned was a set of kitchen knives that he used to cook dinner for his family when he was home between assignments. Tyvek stared at the image. "What happens if the assassination succeeds?" he asked. Peln had been waiting for this question. He brought up a final document, a predictive analysis compiled by the Nuri Intelligence Directorate, cross-referenced with models from 4 other species agencies. It was the most comprehensive projection ever assembled on the likely consequences of a successful assassination of a human civilian on foreign soil. "If Danny Cole is killed," Peln said, "his death will not be treated as an incident. It will be treated as a cause." He walked Tyvek through the projections slowly. First, the immediate response. Human intelligence networks, which were already among the most sophisticated in the galaxy, despite humanity's relative youth as a spacefaring species, would begin tracing the assassination within hours. Every communication, every financial transaction, every ship movement associated with the contract would be scrutinized. The forged layers of anonymity that Tyvek had built around the contract were good, but human analysts had cracked better. "They will find you," Peln said simply. "Not quickly, perhaps, but they will find you. It may take months, it may take years, but based on every historical precedent we have, the probability of them identifying the person who ordered the contract approaches certainty over a long enough timeline." Second, the political response. Danny Cole was not just a diplomat. He was a symbol. He was the kind of human that other humans admire, a quiet, decent man who had dedicated his life to building peace between species that had been fighting for centuries. His death would not be forgotten. It would become a rallying point, a story told on every human world, in every human school, to every human child. The Dravasi Empire would become the villain in that story, and no amount of political maneuvering would change the narrative. "Humans have a concept they call a martyr," Pelm said. "It refers to a person whose death serves a cause greater than their life. If you kill Danny Cole, you will not stop the peace treaty, and you will ensure that every human in the galaxy knows the Dravosi tried to prevent it." Third, and most critically, the personal response. Danny Cole had colleagues, he had friends, he had a wife and 2 children. And based on everything that every intelligence agency in the galaxy had observed about human behavior, those people would not grieve quietly and move on. They would respond. Not with armies or fleets, but with the same patient, methodical, unstoppable determination. that Clara Dixon had shown after Ranith Prime, that Sam Griffin and Katie Owen had shown after the Varesi incident, that every human in recorded galactic history had shown when someone they loved was taken from them. Your monopoly on the fuel routes will not survive the scrutiny, Peln said. Your political allies will distance themselves to avoid association. Your own government, the Dravasi High Council, will almost certainly hand you over to a galactic tribunal to avoid a broader conflict with the human coalition. You will lose everything, your wealth, your title, your freedom, and you will spend the rest of your life in a cell, knowing that the treaty you tried to stop was signed anyway. Tyvek sat in silence for a long time after Peln finished speaking. And if the assassination fails? He asked. Peln's expression did not change, but something in his posture shifted, a slight stiffening, a tension in his thin shoulders that told Tyvek this was the scenario that frightened the intelligence officer more. If the assassination fails, Peln said, then Danny Cole will know. He will know that someone tried to kill him, and based on statistical analysis of past incidents, the probability of failure is actually quite high. Humans are remarkably difficult to kill. They are physically resilient, situationally adaptive, and they possess an instinct for survival that has been sharpened by millions of years of evolution on a planet that tried very hard to kill them every single day. He paused. A human who knows that someone tried to kill them is perhaps the most dangerous thing in the known galaxy. Not because of what they will do in anger. Humans are not mindless in their rage. They are focused. They are methodical. They will channel every ounce of their energy into understanding who did this, why, and how to ensure it never happens again. Danny Cole is a diplomat. He knows people on every world in the outer corridor. He has relationships with intelligence officers, trade commissioners, military liaisons, and heads of state. If he decides that the Dravasi Empire tried to have him killed, he will not need to fire a weapon. He will simply tell the truth, and the truth will do more damage than any fleet. The briefing chamber was very quiet now. The only sound was the faint, rhythmic ticking of the station's environmental regulators cycling air through the ventilation system. Tyvek looked at the face of Danny Cole one last time. The calm expression, the unremarkable features, the face of a schoolteacher from a small town, who had somehow become the most protected man in the galaxy, not because of any guard or any weapon, but because of what his species was, and what they would do if he was harmed. Tyvek reached for the console on his desk. He opened the contract file. He looked at the 5 million credits, the detailed target profile, the carefully worded instructions. He let his finger hover over the screen for a moment. Then he pressed delete. The file disappeared. The holographic image of Danny Cole flickered once and went dark. The briefing chamber was empty except for 2 men, one powerful and one observant, sitting in the dim blue light of a dead asteroid at the edge of known space. You have made a wise decision, Consul, Peln said. Tyvek did not answer. He sat in the dark and thought about a schoolteacher who had taught himself to bury mines, a data analyst who had spent 2 years unraveling a conspiracy for her dead nephew, and a cargo ship engineer who had reprogrammed a navigation computer to fly a crime lord into a neutron star. He thought about a species that could not be killed easily, could not be frightened into silence, and could not be made to forget. Then he stood up, walked to the door, and left the chamber without another word. 3 weeks later, Danny Cole brokered the peace treaty. The fuel routes were open to fair trade for the first time in 80 years. 6 species signed the agreement in a public ceremony on a neutral station, and Danny stood at the podium with his usual quiet smile and thanked everyone for their patience and willingness to compromise. He never knew how close he had come. He never knew that a man in a carved stone room had held his life in his hands and decided, for the first time in a long career of ruthless decisions, that some targets were not worth the cost. On Velrath Station, in a dirty bar on the lower levels, where the lights buzzed and the drinks were cheap, the assassin Sorath sat alone at a corner table. He was drinking something dark and strong from a cracked glass, and he was watching the news broadcast of the treaty signing on a flickering screen above the bar. A young Fenoshi mercenary slid into the seat across from him. He was new to the station, eager and hungry, and he had heard the stories about Sorath, the legendary Kelvari killer who had never failed a contract. The young mercenary leaned forward with bright, ambitious eyes and asked the question that had been burning in him for weeks. "You turned down the biggest contract in a decade," he said. 5 million credits to kill one human. Everyone on the station is talking about it. Why did you say no?" Sorath did not look away from the screen. He watched Danny Cole shake hands with an alien diplomat, smiling that plain, ordinary smile. He took a slow sip of his drink and set the glass down carefully. "Because I intend to die of old age," he said. The young mercenary stared at him, confused, waiting for more. But Sorath had nothing more to say. He finished his drink, stood up, and walked out of the bar without looking back. The broadcast continued to play on the flickering screen. Danny Cole was still smiling. Somewhere in the galaxy, Laura Bennett was flying her cargo ship along a supply route. Meg Turner was diving in the oceans of Tessera. Ben Hartley was grading papers in a rebuilt schoolhouse on Raneth Prime. Clara Dixon was sitting at her workstation, sipping tea, ready for the next time someone made the mistake of thinking that ordinary humans were harmless. And in every dimly lit guild hall, every shadowed back room, every mercenary den and assassin's lounge across the known galaxy, one rule was understood above all others. You do not hunt humans. Not because they are the strongest, not because they are the fastest, not because they have the biggest ships or the most advanced weapons, but because once you start a fight with a human, they will finish it. No matter how long it takes, no matter what it costs, no matter where you try to hide, they will find you, and they will make sure that what you did is answered. Every single time. Velrath Station sat at the edge of known space like a wound that refused to heal. It was built into the hollow shell of a dead asteroid, and over the centuries it had grown into a sprawling maze of rusted corridors, flickering lights, and back-alley markets where anything could be bought if you had the credits and the stomach for it. Governments pretended it did not exist. Law enforcement avoided it. And for the thousands of mercenaries, smugglers, bounty hunters, and assassins who called it home, that was exactly the point. On the lowest level of the station, in a private chamber carved from raw stone and sealed behind 3 layers of encrypted locks, Consul Tyvek of the Dravosi Empire sat behind a desk made of polished alien wood and stared at a holographic image floating in the air before him. The image showed the face of a man, a human man. He had brown hair, a calm expression, and the kind of face that would disappear in any crowd on any world. His name was Danny Cole, and he was a diplomat for the United Earth Coalition. Tyvek hated him. Not personally, of course. Tyvek had never met Danny Cole and had no desire to. But Danny Cole had spent the last 14 months quietly brokering a peace treaty between 6 species in the outer corridor, and if that treaty went through, it would open up the fuel trade routes that the Dravosi Empire had controlled exclusively for over 80 years. Tyvek's family had built their fortune on those routes. His political power depended on them, and this unremarkable human from a small blue planet was about to take it all away with nothing but patience and polite conversation. So Tyvek did what powerful people in the galaxy had always done when someone stood in their way. He posted a contract. 5 million galactic credits, enough to buy a small moon, enough to retire on any paradise world in the known systems. All someone had to do was kill one human diplomat and make it look like an accident. Tyvek posted the contract on every major guild board across 3 sectors. He sent private invitations to the most feared assassins in the galaxy. He made sure the payment was verified by 3 independent financial houses, so that no one could doubt the money was real. Then he sat back in his chair, folded his long gray fingers together, and waited. He expected a flood of responses. He got silence. The first day passed with nothing. Tyvek assumed the assassins were simply reviewing the details, studying the target, and planning their approach. By the second day, he began to feel a small knot of unease in his stomach. By the third day, he received his first response, and it was not what he expected. A Kelvari hitman named Sorath, who was widely regarded as the most dangerous assassin operating in the outer systems, sent a single-line message: "Find someone else." Sorath had never refused a contract. He had killed planetary governors. He had poisoned a fleet admiral in the middle of a military ceremony. He had once eliminated an entire security detail of 40 armed soldiers to reach a single target, and he had done it alone in under 6 minutes. But he would not touch this job. More refusals followed. A Torathi sniper, who had once shot a target through the hull of a moving starship, politely declined. A Fenoshi poison specialist, famous for concoctions that left no trace in any autopsy, sent back the contract with a note that simply read, "I enjoy breathing." A pair of Urleki twin assassins who worked as a team and had never failed a mission in 30 years of service responded with a short audio message. In the recording, one of them could be heard laughing, and the other said, "Is this a joke?" Tyvek was not used to being laughed at. He was not used to being refused. He was the 3rd most powerful political figure in the Dravosi Empire, and he had the resources to make anyone's life very comfortable or very short. But contract after contract came back untouched, and the ones that did come with a response all carried the same quiet, unmistakable tone. Not rudeness, not arrogance, but something closer to pity. As if these killers, these professionals who dealt in death the way merchants dealt in grain, felt sorry for Tyvek because he did not understand something that they all already knew. On the 4th day, Tyvek summoned his intelligence officer. Peln was a Nuri, a species known for their long, thin limbs, their wide, dark eyes, and their almost obsessive attention to detail. He had served as Tyvek's personal analyst for 7 years, and in that time he had provided intelligence on rival governments, criminal syndicates, military operations, and trade negotiations. He was very good at his job, and he was very rarely surprised by anything. But when he walked into the briefing chamber and saw the contract still glowing on the holographic display, unsigned and unclaimed, something flickered across his face that Tyvek had never seen before. It looked like fear. "Explain this," Tyvek said. He gestured at the empty response queue. 5 million credits, and not a single taker. I have offered this contract to the best in the galaxy. What is wrong with them? Peln stood very still for a moment. Then he moved to the display console and began pulling up files. Not the usual intelligence briefings or financial reports, but something else. Old files, archived footage, classified incident reports stamped with the highest security clearances from a dozen different species governments. "There is nothing wrong with them," Peln said quietly. "They are acting rationally. Every single one of them is making the smartest decision they have ever made." Tyvek leaned forward. "It is one human, one diplomat. He has no military training. He has no combat record. He does not even carry a weapon." "That is correct," Peln said. "And it doesn't matter, not even slightly." Peln dimmed the lights in the chamber until the only illumination came from the pale blue glow of the holographic display. He brought up a galactic map, and across it, scattered like drops of blood on a white cloth, were dozens of red markers. Each one represented an incident. Each one represented a moment when someone, somewhere in the galaxy, had made the mistake of targeting a human. "Consul," Peln said, and his voice was steady, but his hands were not. "Before I explain why no assassin in the known galaxy will take your contract, I need you to understand something about humans. And I need you to listen carefully, because what I am about to tell you is the reason that every professional killer on this station looked at your 5 million credits and decided that no amount of money was worth what would come after." He tapped the first red marker on the map. It pulsed gently, and a date appeared beside it. 11 years ago. "Let me show you what happened to the last people who tried." Tyvek settled into his chair, and for the first time in a very long time, the most powerful man in the room felt small.